Hello and welcome back to another video. This one is majorly overdue as it is my Nikon ZF review. I was hoping to do this a month or two ago, but as time went on, I just found myself wanting to use the ZF more and more before I made my review, just so that I can give you my best thoughts and impressions of this camera. I've also been working a lot since getting my new job, so these past 2 months I've pretty much taken barely any photos, and I've just been really busy with work, so I haven't had as much use with this camera as I was hoping to at this point. But here we are almost 4 months later, and I've used it a fair amount, not as much as I was hoping to, but I can still give you some, good insight about this camera after using it for 4 months. Just before we get started, I'm not going to talk about specs or be technical or anything like that, because I don't really see the point in reviews if you just look at chart sheets and look at the different distortions of lenses and stuff like that and how many megapixels and everything. You can just read all of that stuff online. What I like reviews to be is personal experiences with that equipment, so if you're looking for that, then you're in the right place. But I'll first talk about why I bought the Nikon ZF, what I use it for, my likes about the camera, my dislikes, and then I'll finally finish off with my final thoughts. But before we get into those, I quickly just want to say that these aren't really likes and dislikes. These are things that I really like about the camera and think it just makes it just, what it is. And things that are a bit meh, but not necessarily things that I dislike. They're more just like noteworthy things and things to, know about if you're looking to buy this camera. But likes and dislikes sound better, so I'm keeping it like that. Without taking up any more of your time, let's just get on with the review. If you've been watching the channel longer than I've owned the Nikon ZF, you might know why I bought this camera already. But if you haven't, then this is your time to find out why I bought it. So before I got the ZF, my main photography setup was the Fujifilm GFX 50S, and I had the Nikon 65mm 1.4 to go with it. It was an absolutely amazing setup, and I do miss it, although I don't regret selling it, but as time went on, I just found it to be more and more inconvenient. It was heavy, having to manual focus since I didn't have any autofocus lenses was very annoying, the files were massive, and it was sort of just like a one-trick pony with the setup that I had. It was really only good for some specifically styled portraits, and that's about it. I did actually have another lens. I had a Mamiya 45mm f2.8 for the Mamiya 645 that I then adapted onto it, and while that was alright, it just wasn't really the lens for me. And while I do love the images that I created with this camera, I just sort of found myself wanting something a bit more, and more specifically, I wanted a more convenient camera. And after looking at a bunch of different options for weeks, I actually found an incredibly good deal on a Nikon ZF brand new, and I got the ZF, a 28mm f2.8 and a 40mm f2. And for the past 4-ish months, I've shot a number of different things and I've taken some decent photos. And like I said before, admittedly, I haven't taken as many photos as I was hoping to at this point because I've been busy with my job and I've also just been a bit of a creative rut. But the photos that I do have and I have created, I'm pretty happy with them. And the photos that I've taken so far have been a mixture of portraits and landscapes, and that is because the setup that I have and that I, favour right now with the ZF is kind of more towards landscape photography. While I class myself as mainly a portrait photographer, since that's my favourite thing to shoot, I've pretty much fell in love with this 28mm f2.8 that is on the camera here. It's just an amazing lens. But a 28mm lens isn't exactly known as a portrait lens, it's more traditionally a landscape or like a documentary lens. So that's pretty much what I've been mainly using it for, although I have used it for some portraits here and there, and I really like how they look as it gives you a unique perspective that, I'm not exactly too familiar with because I mainly shot with a 50 at the tightest, and then sometimes a 35 as well. But I am wanting to get another lens for this camera, and I was looking at the 35 f1.4, since 35mm before this lens was kind of like my favourite go-to focal length. It was a bit wider than a 50 because I wouldn't want to go past a 50, and it allowed me to do some landscape photography as well and more like, environmental portraits. But I think a 35mm right now is actually perfect for me for both portrait, like traditional portrait photography, landscapes, and also environmental portraits. So I think I'll go with a 35 1.4. Anyway, now let's talk about what I like with the Nikon ZF. And I think the first thing has to be the retro styling. This camera is just beautiful, it looks just like a classic 35mm SLR, and I just love that. One of the reasons I bought this camera was because I love it when cameras make me feel good. And when you have a camera that looks this good, you just can't help but feel good. It's the exact same feeling I have with my Fujifilm X-T4, or even with my old GFX. I really liked how that camera looked, and it always made me want to go out and shoot. And that is no different with this ZF. Every time I look at it, I'm like, okay, I do need to go shoot today. Anyway, moving on, the build of this camera is also fantastic. It's weighty, but not too heavy, and it has a super premium feel to it. And I think that this is where the ZF differs from another retro style camera like the Fujifilm X-T4 or, you know, any other Fujifilm camera. They tend to feel a bit more plasticky and light, not in like a bad way, but more of just like an ergonomic, lightweight sort of way. They just feel a bit more mass produced, where this sort of feels like it's been handcrafted. And I think that's down to the body being magnesium alloy and the dials being brass, and there's just, you know, quite a bit of weight here actually. And I know most Fujifilm cameras are also produced with magnesium alloy, but it feels different to this one. This one actually makes it feel like metal. On the Fujifilm cameras that I've used, it just sort of feels like this high quality plastic. Another great thing about the ZF that really surprised me when I first got it was the autofocus. And I wasn't expecting too much out of the autofocus when I was buying this camera, as the reviews that I watched said it was just, you know, good autofocus, but not, you know, the best in its category. But I've used quite a few cameras with really good autofocus, and hands down, the ZF is the best. Before the ZF, I think the best autofocus that I've used on a camera was probably one of like the really high-end Canon cameras, like a Canon R3 or a Canon R5. And I thought it couldn't get any better than that, but if I'm being honest, I think it's on par, if not better with this, but that could just be because I've had more experience with this and more time with this. But, you know, from that experience and time that I've had, it's just insane. The ZF is snappy, accurate, and hasn't let me down once in these 4 months. And I know I'm not shooting like sports and like really high-paced stuff, but for a camera to just get the eye every single time like that, it's amazing. It's just perfect. It's all I could ask for, and it's just, you know, not let me down. Even the animal autofocus is really good, which is surprising because just looking at this camera, you can tell that it's not been made with wildlife photography in mind, but it's just really good. Once again, just snappy, accurate, and I think it's maybe missed one shot when I was just taking a silly photo of my cat, but that's because she moved right as I took the photo. Other than that, it's pretty much got every single photo in focus on the eye every time. Another thing I like about the ZF that relates to the last point that I just made is the manual focus assistance features. When it comes to manual focusing, a lot of cameras have a zoom feature, a focus peaking feature, or both of them if you're lucky. But the ZF has a zoom feature, a focus peaking feature, an eye tracking feature, and a focus confirmation on the eye or head feature when manual focusing, which is just insane. Unfortunately, I haven't had the pleasure of using the focus confirmation feature, as you do need a lens that has electronic contacts, and I was using a Helios lens that was adapted to the ZF, so there's no electronic contacts there. But even so, with that setup, I could still use the eye tracking feature, and it is just perfect. It's so accurate. As well, something that I've noticed that I may as well add in here, whenever I was using lenses on my GFX, or if I've ever adapted a lens onto any other camera other than this camera, the exposure has been very off, no matter what, because there's no electronic contacts and it can't, you know, the camera can't talk to the lens. But with this camera, even when I was using the Helios lens, which has no contacts once more, the exposure was perfect every single time, no matter what I changed the aperture on, oh my god, no matter what I changed the aperture to on the Helios lens, this camera was just like, yep, that shutter speed, that ISO, you're good to go. So I could use a manual focus lens with no electronic contacts in aperture priority mode on this camera. Like, that is just insane. but having these manual focusing features allows you to get the best chances possible of getting your images in focus every time. Something that I get asked about a lot whenever I post my images on Instagram or on YouTube, whenever I'm using this camera specifically, is my tones and colors. And I would like to say that I'm just really good at, color balance and color reproduction and just, I'm amazing with color. But that's just not the truth. If I'm being completely honest, I rarely change my colors, like at all. Probably the most I'll do is either bump up the vibrance a tiny bit, like to +5, or just change the warmth. But those amazing colors are all thanks to just this camera's just amazing color science. I don't know how they do it, but they look true to life and accurate, but they also have some sort of like weird enhancement to them where it looks more than just a replication of what I'm seeing. It looks like I've taken it, when you take an image on film and it just looks magical, sort of similar to when you're editing images with this. And I don't like editing much at all. I used to love it a lot more than I do now. It's something that I kind of just put off until the very end now, but having such a good base to start from thanks to the color science of the ZF, it makes editing a lot easier. And the final thing that I like about the ZF is actually just sort of two things, but they kind of have the same function and they're in the same category, so I'll just put it as one. And that is the black and white switch that allows you to seamlessly switch between shooting RAW and shooting in your desired film simulation style picture profile. There isn't too much to say about this switch other than it's super convenient and it's just a really cool feature. And if I'm being honest, I thought it was going to be a feature that I just don't use, but because of how good the picture profiles in this camera are, specifically the red filter black and white one, I find myself going to that quite often, like actually like a lot. Every shoot I'll switch between them and just see what looks better. And then, a lot of my images have been black and white. But anyway, let's move on to the things that I dislike about the camera. And like I said before, they're not necessarily things that I really don't like. It's sort of things that are a bit noteworthy and just a bit meh. And the first one is the ISO function. When you first get the camera out of the box, the ISO function, specifically the auto ISO function, is a bit weird, and I can't explain it very well, but if you know, you know. It's kind of like having auto ISO was an afterthought for Nikon when they were making this camera, and it seems like they really struggled to implement it in an efficient way because they had the dials and they're like, oh, well, people will just use the dials. It's like, sometimes people want to use auto ISO just so they can, turn their mind off for a bit. I just don't see why they couldn't have had the C switch that's on here on the ISO thing be an auto ISO one instead of just a really annoying custom one which doesn't actually allow you to have auto ISO. It's just really weird. It is really easy to fix, however, and I have fixed it. So basically, if I now use the C, I then can go into my I menu on the back there and then turn on auto ISO. Which, it's not difficult to do that. It does take a little bit more time, but I don't understand why they couldn't have just made it a setting so when you flick it to C, or if there was one next to C, you could just have, auto, or you flick it to C, then it goes to auto or whatever. That would just be so much easier, and I just don't see why they couldn't have it like it is on a Fujifilm camera. Like I said, auto ISO just seemed like an afterthought when they were making this camera. I don't really get why. My second dislike about this camera is the weird ibis rattle. It's so strange, and this is the only camera that I've ever used and I've ever actually heard of that has this problem. Basically, this camera has ibis, in-body image stabilization, and when it's turned off, it's not locked into place, so the lens moves around when you move the camera around, or I think it's something like that at least. Not the lens, the sensor. I'll try and show you in a second actually, but originally when I got this camera, I thought it was broken because, when it's turned off, it was making a weird rattle sound. And my mind immediately went to the worst thing possible, thinking, oh no, my camera's been broken in the post and, this and that. I quickly found out that it's just a stupid feature of this camera, and everyone just sort of unanimously agrees that it's just a dumb decision to have an IBIS system that doesn't lock in place. But I'll try and see if I can get you to hear it now. Not sure if you can hear that, but that's the ibis. It's just really weird. And my final dislike about the ZF is the lack of grip. There really isn't much to say. It's a well-known thing that Nikon just decided to not have a grip for whatever reason. I get that, you know, older, SLRs that this was based off didn't have a grip, but, you know, you've had a sensor and a bunch of electronic components. You can at least add a grip. You don't have to stay completely true to what, you are basing it off. But it's definitely worth getting yourself a grip for this camera. I've got mine here. It's very small, but it also has a little grip on the back for your thumb as well, and that is absolutely amazing. That's like the best feature about this grip. Obviously having that is good at the front, but having your thumb be able to hold it there as well, it's just amazing. So yeah, definitely worth getting yourself a grip with a thumb grip. But that's the end of my likes and dislikes on the ZF, so I guess it's time to tell you my final thoughts. And if I'm being honest, I'm not really sure what to say other than this camera is very good. The technology inside is amazing, the design is just peak engineering and design, and I have just loved using it. There are a couple things that are a bit meh, like I mentioned, but they're really easy to just, not get worked up over, and like other than those three things, the camera is just amazing. I'll be making another video about the Nikon ZF when I've owned it for 6 months, and I'll most likely be answering some questions in that video. So if you have any questions about the ZF, just feel free to, leave them down below. I'll probably still reply, I definitely will still reply to your comment down below, but I'll also probably feature them in another video as well. And if you want to see specific content about this camera, whether it's like a special feature of this camera, a more in-depth look, some lenses, or whatever you want to see, don't be afraid to ask. Give me a message on Instagram, leave a comment, just do whatever, and I will try my best to create a video for you. But that will be the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.